Good evening. This is Judah Segal, the chairman of the Jewish Community Relations Council, speaking to you from Raleigh, North Carolina. And today, this evening, is the first of a series of at least 5 events on politics and the politics of how you can vote and how it will affect you and who you can vote for, as well as a number of other issues. I'm very pleased tonight to have as our guests, first of all, Jonah Kaplan. Jonah is a political reporter for ABC 11, and he is with us here. He's actually in Charlotte, just having covered the president's visit, but he'll be speaking to us tonight to answer a lot of questions. And we are very fortunate tonight also to have Jonah's colleague, Michael Perchick, who is in Raleigh and also with ABC 11. So Jonah and Michael, thank you so much for being with us as part of this Jewish Community Relations Council evening about politics. And we have named tonight what you need to know and what you don't know yet. And in that category, we're going to ask a number of 3 big questions, and I'll pose them to our guest reporters tonight. One of them will relate to voting, how we do it, and all the details that relate to voting. We're going to talk about some of the key issues, particularly how they relate to the Jewish community, and also, if there's time, about some of the comments about what's on the ballot. And so you know when you pick up a ballot what to expect and see. So first of all, Jonah, welcome from Charlotte. Michael.
Thanks very much.
Michael, welcome from Raleigh.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
Well, thank you both. By the way, I'll just mention here, the next 4 events will be Jonah interviewing candidates for us, and so you can hear directly from them as they relate to issues to us in the Jewish community. I'll also just mention one technical thing, and that is that if you miss an event, or if you want to show it to a friend, as these events take place, recordings of them will be posted on the Jewish Federation Jewish Community Relations Council website, so be able to watch it later. Okay, with that said, let's start our questions right away. And John, I'm going to start with you, and that is, let's say I just moved to North Carolina or to Raleigh, and let's say, or maybe I just turned 18 and I haven't registered yet, and I'm saying, is there still time? Can I still do it?
There's definitely still time. In fact, yesterday was quote unquote National Voter Registration Day. And in North Carolina, you're actually going to be able to register to vote until October 9th. So you and Michael can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but you certainly have time. And even in early voting, I believe you're going to be able to do some registration, one-stop shop. You will not be able to do it on Election Day, but you can certainly do it on some of the early voting days. And early voting starts on October 15th and will go 17 days. There will be 20 polling locations in Wake County. And look, registering obviously is very, very important. You're not voting unless you register. And we don't have automatic registry when you turn 18. So this is something that's very easy. You can go right on to the North Carolina State Board of Elections website, and that's ncsbe.gov. ncsbe.gov. Say it with me again. ncsbe.gov. And this is where you can do it through the DMV. You can do it right online, and it's all right there for you. And North Carolina has really done a tremendous job in getting out the registrations. Already a record this year. We are up to 7.15 million registered voters in North Carolina. That's a record out of 11 million residents. And absentee ballot requests, now more than 1 million. So 1 out of every 7 registered voters are going to be voting absentee this year.
But tell me, in the past, how many people have usually wanted an absentee ballot?
Normally, and we can look back, even back to 2016, we're talking maybe 3 to 5%. 3 to 5%. This year, it's going to be about 30, is what election officials tell us.
So this is a really big difference this year in terms of the number of people. By the way, and maybe Michael, you might know this, do I need to be sick or elderly or out of town to get an absentee ballot?
Well, you don't need to be sick or elderly or any of those things. No, hey, look, it certainly depends on where you live from an absentee ballot perspective in terms of who can be the witness. And I think that's probably, and Jonah can correct me, probably the key issue we're seeing right now with absentee ballots that are being marked as deficient, that the witness signature isn't being filled out properly or it's not being filled out by an appropriate person. The State Board of Elections is actually doing a really nice job of kind of breaking it down of who can be a witness and what that process looks like. A lot of voting rights advocacy groups have also really been enhancing their education. Look, last week, I believe from Black voters, there was 7% of their absentee ballots were being marked as deficient. That's a fairly large percentage. This week, that number is down to 4%. So what that's showing is that the education is improving and that ballots are now being cured, which means that issues that were happening previously weren't happening are no longer happening. Essentially, from a witness perspective, anybody can be a witness, except if you live in a nursing home, it cannot be nursing home staff, cannot be the candidate themselves unless you are a significant other of the candidate, and can't be their campaign manager or treasurer. Pretty much outside of that, it can be a family member who's 18. It can be a
spouse.
It can
a spouse
be
to witness.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So it is important you get that. It's important they fill out the information correctly. They have to sign it and fill out the information in terms of their name and address. So simple, small things with an absentee ballot could be the reason why it's marked as deficient. It's also why it's important to get that in earlier, so you're not waiting the last second to try and make those corrections.
So it sounds like the most likely reason it's being returned, if I'm hearing you right, is that it isn't signed properly or by the right person. Is that the biggest issue?
That's what the State Board of Elections has voiced to us so far. And I think a lot of that is simply just a lack of understanding about the process. As Jonah mentioned, you're looking at a 3 to 4% in a typical election, probably 30 to 40% this year. The bulk of those folks have never voted absentee before. I've never voted absentee before. This is my first year doing it. So, look, Jonah and I get to cover this stuff. We get to call the people up and actually have them answer the questions. So we should be getting it right ourselves. It's so much information out there for folks. And so much paperwork coming in. I mean, we have mailers coming in, a lot from third parties wanting you to register through them and send in the ballots to them. So it can be confusing, and we understand that. But I think part of what we do from a reporting perspective is try and break that down as simply as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. And Michael, and to everyone, I do want to mention one other thing. Jonah, you were having people remember that web address. After this event, a couple of days after tonight, everyone who's on the call will get a form from a voter information general election information sheet. So all the addresses and email connections and links that Jonah and Michael talk about tonight, you will have in your hand or on your computer. And so you don't have to remember them, although do follow Jonah's lead and remember it, but you'll have them in writing from us. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work, and and Judah, I'm going to invite you actually to now pull up some of our stories that we worked on.
Sure.
Because even if you've seen it, it's worth watching again to see behind the scenes how this is working, the incredible effort that's being put into stuffing these envelopes, getting these requests, what it takes to get an absentee ballot. So let's pull up some of these things and watch it.
All right, why don't we take a look at that first story? Let's see, Mindy can do that for us. It'll take just a moment. She's going to put it up on the screen, and we are going to be replaced with one of Jonah's stories as she gets it ready. And while we're waiting for that, just for a moment, I do want to mention, Jonah, the next thing I'm going to give you a tip-off of the next question, which is going to be about voting in person and the two ways that people will be able to do that, both early or on election day. But let's go to the video as soon as...
Oh, how they love to work here at the warehouse. A fine-tuned, well-oiled Wake County Board of Elections machine that's now working overtime to meet the demand of North Carolina voters. To date, a record 7 million registered voters and nearly 620,000 requests for absentee ballots across the state.
Numbers
Wake
are a little out
County,
of date.
state's largest, another record. 770,000 registered voters, more than 108,000 requests for absentee ballots.
Right now we're at over 3 times the amount that we had in its entirety in 2016 of requests.
Those requests verified either by information on a driver's license or social security number, After that, they're given a label, a barcode, and a ballot, all stuffed into the envelope and sent to the post office, where it's then headed your way. As ballots hit the mail tomorrow, this pivotal purple state inches closer to other key dates on the calendar. Early voting just 42 days away. The last day to request an absentee ballot, 54 days away. They must be postmarked by Election Day, just 61 days away. Ballots mailed back to the warehouse, where they'll sit locked in this cage until they're opened, inspected, and counted at public Board of Elections meetings. Angela Hawkins is one of 2 Republicans on the board.
President Trump was here yesterday. He's coming to Winston-Salem on Tuesday of next week. Okay. He'll probably be back again. If you had the opportunity to speak with him, what do you tell him about the voter process in Wake County and in North Carolina?
We have a secure election system. Every voter gets one vote and one vote only.
Here's an interesting fact as well. President Trump, the White House, if they called here and asked for a tour of the facility, we want to see how it works, we want to go behind the scenes, that's actually not allowed because President Trump is a candidate on the ballot. And this is a secure facility. In Raleigh, Jonah Kaplan, ABC 11 Eyewitness News.
All right. Well, thank you. What a great report. And you know what, Jonah, I think you're muted. Let's get your sound back on.
Yeah, I'm here. So, you see already that, a lot of those numbers are even outdated. And that was 2 weeks ago. And that's very important.
John, I'm going to switch my order a little bit to match what we just saw. I'm going to go for a moment right to absentee voting. So you've talked about how to get how to register, how to get a ballot, fill it out, and Michael's told us to be sure we get it signed and witnessed properly. I understand that there's 2 ways to return that ballot. One would be to mail it in. Another would be to deliver it directly to the office there. Can you tell us about those 2 ways?
Absolutely. Well, first, we know the U.S. Postal Service, and right now they're telling us that if you want to put it in the mail, it will take about 7 to 10 days is what they're asking for. Give it 7 to 10 days. And actually, on that North Carolina State Board of Elections website, ncsbe.gov, they debuted something called ballot tracks. Every absentee ballot is actually given kind of a barcode. It's going to have its own digital print. And you can track that ballot, which, look, we can track our Amazon packages. We can track our pizza orders. Now you can actually track your ballot, and you'll be able to see its process from when the Board of Elections gets your request to when it's sent out to when it's being sent back. The post office will actually also scan it, and when it is in the hands of the Board of Elections. Now, so you can do it by mail, and it must be postmarked. Must be postmarked by November 3rd. But here's the thing: currently, as the law states, and there's this is in court right now, but currently, as the law states, it must be received, arrive at the County Board of Elections by November 6th. So if you want to push the envelope, literally, and you want to say, all right, I'm going to go postmark this on Election Day, it better get there in 3 days, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The other thing you could do is literally hand deliver this to your County Board of Elections. So if you live in Wake County, you bring it to the office in Raleigh, you drop it off, you will sign it, you will log it. It is here, and you will see it there. As of right now, there is no drop box for absentee ballots. There is no kind of mailbox that's specifically for you, almost like we used to do it, Blockbuster Video, drop off the tape when you're done with it. This is, you've got to either mail it in or deliver it yourself.
And by the way, I understand delivering it, you must be done by 5 p.m. on November 3rd if you want to deliver it directly to the Wake County Board of Elections.
Correct.
But let me switch for a second now, and I'm going to, Michael, let's see what you know. There's a test here. So let's say, in fact, you don't want to fuss with
He knows.
He knows. All right, we'll find out.
See now it's being set up for
now you're really
if I answer correctly.
You have no choice.
Don't answer correctly.
So this is a softball. Now, if you want to vote in person, you have 2 choices. You can vote early or you can vote on Election Day. Tell us a little bit about both of those choices.
Sure. So voting early, I believe, began. That was softer than I was expecting. Okay. Early voting is from October 15th to October 31st, as Jonah said, 17 days, plenty of opportunity for folks to vote early. And we actually are hearing this from voting rights advocacy groups. They're really actually promoting it probably more so this year than they had in years past. Part of that is from safety concerns. Due to COVID-19, you typically have more lax hours, smaller crowds during those early voting periods. So could be a good opportunity if you know who you're going to be voting for early, likely not going to sway, to take advantage of that. So you have that, and as Jonah also mentioned, Friday, October 9th is the registration deadline. But if you don't get it in by then, you can do same-day registration only during early voting. So if you miss that October 9th deadline, you still have the 17 days from the 15th to the 31st next month to go ahead and vote. Obviously, you have Election Day. I'm not anticipating us seeing the large lines, the big crowds we see every year, in part because there is a huge influx in absentee balloting, in part because I think this is probably an election where you have fewer undecided voters than you had back in 2016. You don't have the big third-party push that we had in 2016. So you definitely have options, but again, the safest thing to do, if you know who you're voting for, you want to get out of the way early, you can either do it absentee or take advantage of those early voting hours. That's going to depend, by the way, on your polling location. They're not all necessarily going to have uniform hours. So make sure that your specific polling location is open on those specific days or the time you want to go.
Yeah, and I'm going to add there, Michael, that not every polling place is an early voting place.
Correct, and that's why it's certainly important for you to double check beforehand if that polling location does have those hours.
Right. Now, again, they'll be on this sheet that we're going to send you, those early voting locations and hours, or how to find them on the website. I also mentioned you can go to any, am I correct, go to any of the early voting places. They don't have to be the one closest to your home. They can handle it. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so. I
think that's true. Let me ask you, let's say you want to just vote on voting day, heaven forbid. I mean, it's November 3rd, it's time to vote. I go now to only one place, correct? I go to my voting spot, which would be on, which I would need to check and make sure that I'm going to the right one, right?
Yeah, and you can actually check that online. If you have a good memory and you haven't moved, it's where you voted last election. For me, I believe it's Root Elementary School. But yeah, so if you go to your county board of election, or even the state board of elections, we'll tell you what your polling location is. So it's pretty simple.
Okay, and let me just mention also, by the way, the ballots are slightly different. In other words, depending on where you're voting.
Correct.
You might be in a different district, and so the ballots are mostly the same. There are some differences.
Slight variances, yes.
So, which also brings me to the point that do get a ballot. So going online lets you get a sample ballot for your address, and therefore you can fill it all out and study it before going to the poll or mailing it in.
I would encourage people to take a look at that sample ballot as well. I think at this point everyone has a pretty good idea when it comes to the presidential race, Senate race, or governor's race, but there are a lot of down ballot races, or the referendum that Judah, you and I had discussed earlier, that probably do require folks to do a little bit more digging, a little bit more information, stuff that we're not covering from a local news perspective as closely. So for the referendum in particular, it's a fairly meaty paragraph. It's not something you're going to skim over quickly and get. So the city of Raleigh, in this case, actually has a website set up, has plenty of links set up, breaking down the map, and there you go. So
it's 2 pages. It's one front and back. It's a lot on it.
There's definitely a lot on it. So I think, especially for those down ballot races where you may not be as knowledgeable offhand, which is completely fine, take a look at the sample ballot, see what you're going to be voting on, and just do your own research.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonah. Don't get away from us, because I have some really important questions for you.
I'm here.
You're the political reporter. Both of you are reporters, obviously. But so one of the biggest questions I have, and I have a few details underneath it, but let me ask the broad question first. And that is, our main audience tonight is the Jewish community. And so what are as you can see, what do you think are, your opinion, the key issues facing the Jewish community that we're going to be seeing on the ballot?
You know, it's interesting.
Both of you.
You know, I think it's interesting because, look, we've heard a lot about Israel in the past couple of weeks. We've heard a lot about these quote unquote peace accords, which are very important, these normalizations between Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, and these other things, and then some other potential Middle Eastern countries, Arab countries that are going to be recognizing Israel. I think it's wonderful developments. I'm not sure that's on the top of mind of Jewish voters. I think that Israel is kind of a backseat issue right now, not because it's not important, but because there's just a lot more pressing things. And it's wonderful that Israel is being recognized, but we can't even visit Israel right now. If I wanted to get on a plane, I couldn't go there. And if I went there, I would have had to, quarantine for 2 weeks. And even Israel is going to be the first Western country to have a second full-scale lockdown. So, I think there's just so many more pressing things. I even think anti-Semitism, which, 2 years ago, I think if the presidential election was held in 2018, which was in the midst of the Tree of Life shooting, the massacre, and then the Poway synagogue, I even think anti-Semitism would have been on the minds more of Jewish voters. But I think that a lot of the issues, healthcare and the pandemic in particular, and even the racial strife right now, it really puts Jewish voters more in line of being just Americans instead of American Jews. And I think that's just, and people say, oh, well, these peace accords are wonderful for President Trump. Yes, they are. Jimmy Carter also was able to get a peace accord, presumably bigger than the ones these are, between Israel and Egypt. And how'd that work out for his reelection? It didn't.
Good point.
I'm not really sure that it's going to be something. But, I think had Bernie Sanders been the nominee, or someone who was a little more progressive and very left-wing, that could have been more of an issue. But Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I would call them, these are AIPAC Democrats. They are not J Street Democrats. Both of them have spoken at AIPAC. Both of them have a record of being pro-Israel, of being more, certainly right-wing Democrats when it comes to supporting Israel. And I just don't think that those traditional issues are going to be as prominent as they used to be, at least not this year.
I have some other questions, but before I get to that, Michael, your input on the same, on the Israel. Let's talk about Israel for a second. In other words, do you feel that it's a major issue affecting Jewish voters, or a backseat issue, or other voters?
I think there's a national perspective that Jewish Americans are going to vote based purely off Israel, and that just hasn't played itself out election after election. In fact, evangelicals are far more likely to vote based off Israel than Jewish Americans are. So while Jonah is correct in the sense that, yes, the peace accord and the potential progress in the Middle East between Israel and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, potentially other countries, is certainly historic and important, how many people can point out UAE on a map, or Bahrain on a map, or name the leaders of their countries? We're in the midst of a pandemic that has killed more than 200,000 people. The jobless rate continues to really not be where it was pre-pandemic. The stock market has not fully rebounded, and the gains we have seen have been pushed by 5 companies. Look, there's so many other pressing issues happening right now. People typically vote by what affects them directly. So while they may want to vote on Israel, and that may be a small factor, ultimately, it's probably not going to be any sort of major deciding factor one way or another. I think there's certainly things, policies that the Trump administration have passed that are favorable and maybe well liked by members of the Jewish American community. But again, we've also seen rising anti-Semitism over the past 4 years. Year after year, it seems like there's new historic highs, according to the FBI. I think it's just that type of pattern. It's tough to differentiate the two at times. I can't imagine it's going to be a huge issue.
Well, I think you make a good point. Is actually there are, if one were looking at it purely through Jewish eyes and not any other way, there are both positives and concerning negatives. So it depends on what you're looking at. But sure. Thank you for bringing up both of those points. Allow me to also talk about another issue which is on everyone's mind and clearly happening, and that is, of course, the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. From a Jewish community standpoint, it would be, and for that matter, for many people in the country at large, it's hard to find someone who doesn't admire her as a human being, as a woman, as a leader, as just one of the most remarkable people that has been alive in our time. So I think that goes without saying. However, from a strict politics standpoint, of course, it's more complicated. So I guess, Jonah, I see you're walking down the street. You're just leaving. You're staying with us.
I just got.
Are you walking back to Raleigh?
I'm walking back to my car, which is a mile away. Yeah, listen, this is part of the job, everybody. I'm on the move, and I'm glad I could be with you. Now you're seeing the real beautiful and high profile and such luxurious life of the reporter.
So if anyone has any doubts about someone, so yeah. Good job though. You're a cameraman and you're a reporter. So, right. But the issue of Ruth Ginsburg last evening, for example, there was a beautiful event by many of the Reformed congregations in North Carolina.
But look, this is a very big deal. Yeah, I mean, Antonin Scalia's death back in 2016, February of 2016, which was 8 months before the election, that came to define the race. It became a central tenet of debates. It became a central tenet of the arguments that, hey, this is not just about replacing a president, it's about replacing a Supreme Court justice. And, right now it's absolutely a power play. And the Republicans have it. And it's a big deal because either they're going to be able to push through somebody, presumably the final two, we believe, is a woman named Amy Coney Barrett. Another is Barbara Lagoa. Both of them women, both of them known to be conservative judges, although Lagoa, interesting, she's a Cuban American and comes from Florida, whereas Amy Coney Barrett, she is more of a kind of a Midwestern, and she teaches at Notre Dame. She's more of what you would consider, for lack of a better term, maybe like a female, Gorsuch or Kavanaugh. It's the ramifications of this and the consequences, depending on what side of this. And the president knows it too. I mean, if we look back at Bush Gore in 2000, that was a 5-4 Supreme Court decision. Right now, we have a 4-4 court. So, or we have the potential for a 4-4 split. So getting a 9th justice is huge, no matter who that is. Then there are such issues like healthcare, the Affordable Care Act. This is being challenged in court presently. And this could be the deciding vote on that. There are a lot of different things. And this, I think the Supreme Court was always going to be an issue. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not getting any younger. Neither was Clarence Thomas, David Souter, even Samuel Alito, I think is in his 70s. With the exception of, I think, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, I think everyone else on that bench, could be getting close to retiring. So the Supreme Court was always going to be an issue, but certainly it's been magnified now. I know Michael has been looking at it because there's actually a third potential, and that's Allison Jones Rushing, who has some North Carolina ties. I think that's a dark horse candidate, but Michael can chime in on that.
Michael?
Sure, yeah. Allison Jones Rushing is 38 years old. Just for comparison, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was in her young 60s. Look, these are lifetime appointments. There is inherent value picking a candidate or picking a justice who is that young and could serve for 40 or 50 years to a position like this, especially when you look at the current makeup of the court, which does skew to be much older, because these are positions where you obviously have to be fairly experienced, typically, to get a role of this magnitude and vetted fairly seriously. I would agree with Jonah at this point. I think she's probably more of a dark horse candidate. Mark Meadows, the former congressman who certainly has the president's ear, has been pushing Jones Rushing from what we can tell from reports. I'd be surprised if the president went that way. I think Barrett probably has a much larger national profile. She had been up as potential option prior to Kavanaugh being chosen last go around. The president has committed to choosing a female to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I think those are probably the top three choices. Jonah eloquently broke down the qualifications of the top two. In terms of this being an election issue, it's kind of interesting because I think this could potentially galvanize some Democrats or voters who may not be enthusiastic about Biden, or some independent voters who may not be enthusiastic about Biden, to make sure they do vote, especially if they could be seeing a court that may not be what they would consider to be favorable from a breakdown perspective. From a Republican standpoint, if they do get a justice on, well, then you kind of got them what you want. You're going to have the Supreme Court. We've heard for a while the power of having the Supreme Court. I don't know the nuclear option of this contested election going to the Supreme Court is highly likely, but in the event it is, obviously getting that fifth potential vote would be big. But I don't know necessarily how much of a boon this would be for Republicans, even if Trump and the Republicans are able to get through their candidate to the court. I think at that point they'd sit there and say, we got what we wanted. We got the court the way we like it. What else can he offer? Almost in hindsight, if Trump did win the election and you had 4 more years, or there was a potential further seat for him to fill, that would be greater value to Trump than him pushing it through right now before Election Day, because what else is he selling at that point?
Okay. What is your opinion, by the way, both of you? Will it happen? Just knowing politics as you do. The Republicans seem to have the Senate, they have the president. Will it happen?
I think if it's Barbara Lagoa, yes, she'll be confirmed. I think Barrett will be a little more divisive, and I think that's where you will have, I think of someone like a Mitt Romney, and if Mitt Romney can convince one other senator along with him. You have Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, the senator from Maine and Alaska, respectively, already saying they don't support this. They're not gonna vote. Mitt Romney, I don't think is going to vote for someone who's divisive. I think he's going to vote for somebody who he sees in any other time would be confirmed. And Amy Coney Barrett, she brings with her a deep religious background. Not that there's anything wrong with that, as they would say in Seinfeld. But I just think that would be a more divisive character where I think they're going to want some sort of consensus. And if Romney can get one more senator to go with him on that, one more, especially someone like a lot of these senators have said they'll consider a nominee. They've never said that they would vote for it. And I think that's what's going to be. It's after they decide who's going to be picked, what are the polls showing? And if the polls show that this is not a popular pick or someone who's divisive, people in these big swing states, maybe even Tom Tillis, although he's gone way right and has embraced Trump to try and shore up his reelection. But I think that if it's someone who can build a consensus, then they're more likely to vote.
Jonah, that's a very interesting perspective, because my mindset has always been that it is far safer politically to say you don't want to hold the vote, trying to apply the same standards of the Merrick Garland incident, for lack of a better term, a few years ago, rather than hold the vote and then say no. So we saw Collins and Murkowski, they've already come out and say no. Romney was a bit of surprise that he'd say yes to go along with it. He's been a critic of the president. He voted for impeachment. They personally don't seem to get along all too well. But the fact that he got him to say yes, I think is a pretty good sign for their chances. If I was a betting man, I would say it's fairly likely at this point that they're going to try and push this through. President Trump seems pretty bullish on trying to get this done. And I think the folks around him want this done as well, especially if the polls don't look great. They understand the power of getting this done before Election Day. If Trump loses, they may not want this lingering after for potential President Biden to get to choose Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement. So I think that probably is going to factor in as well, not only the polls for individual senators, but if they think Trump doesn't have a chance, they may push it through to say, at least we got the Supreme Court done.
By the way, even if Biden were to win the election, there is a time period in between the election and the change. Do the senators change the same time as the president's inauguration? Is that the date?
Yes, except for one, and this is it
Right.
could be a wild card in the state of Arizona. there's a election between Martha McSally, who's the current senator. She was appointed to succeed the late John McCain, and she is being challenged by Mark Kelly, who is the husband of Representative Gabby Giffords, who was the victim in that, the survivor of that mass shooting. So that's a special election. That means if Kelly defeats McSally, he could be seated as soon as November 30th. So if that happens, he has to win first. But if that happens, then you now have a situation where the Senate is now 52-48, and now you will need only 3 senators instead of 4 Republicans to block a nomination.
Regardless of that outcome, after the election, could in fact President Trump and the Senate confirm a justice?
Of course they can.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, nothing can stop them. In fact, you wonder if some of these people like a Tillis or a Cory Gardner from Colorado and they lose, they may just say, the heck with it, I'll vote for whoever.
Okay. Are there any arrows in the quiver of the Democrats that they could actually stop this, or it's all just a desire and politicking, but they really can't? Or is there some way they could affect it?
No.
Desire.
That's what I didn't think so.
A lot of desire. I mean, and Cory Booker, I think, pretty much said that earlier. They're going to try to appeal to the humanity of Republicans and trying to get this through. There's no love lost in politics. And I think ultimately, for something as valuable as a Supreme Court seat, it would certainly take a lot to convince them, outside of, the candidate doesn't have any glaring issues, to not vote for the candidate out of some sort of sense of pride to the greater good.
So one more question here that goes up to the top of the ticket. Yesterday, I think it was, that Vice President Biden was in North Carolina. Obviously, Jonah, you just were covering President Trump's visit to Charlotte. From the again, I realize that Jewish folks have a lot of different opinions, or more opinions than we are people. But nevertheless, any comments about our presidential candidates in relation, again, from the Jewish community perspective? Any thoughts?
Look, I think you can look at every election. The Republicans seem to think, oh, this year is going to be the year where we get more Jewish voters. And consistently, you're seeing between 70 to 80% of Jewish voters vote Democratic. I think that as the and also as younger Jews start to enter, I think that could even increase. It's very unlikely that you're going to see, I think, a majority of Jews vote Republican. Statistically, it just doesn't happen. It hasn't happened, and I think the American Jewish experience has traditionally been a democratic kind of social issue-driven psyche.
Michael, any thoughts? Yeah, I mean, year after year, it's the same narrative. This will be the year the Jewish vote will finally turn. And Trump's alluded to it, pretty much out loud, with the moving of the embassy, the peace accords, how much he's done for Israel. But as I said earlier, a lot of those issues, evangelicals like them a lot more than Jewish Americans do. Not that Jewish Americans don't like them, just not top of mind. So I think I'm not expecting there to be much of a shift compared to 2016. Interestingly enough, you have familial ties with obviously Trump's daughter Ivanka converting, and Kushner on the Democrat side. Kamala Harris's husband is Jewish. So interesting that one way or another there will be some familial ties there. But ultimately, I don't think that's going to make a huge difference.
Okay, thank you both. I'm going to switch to a couple of questions that came in from our listeners real quick. And then after that, I want to talk about a little bit down ballot questions for North Carolina. But before I go there, let me ask you this question coming in from a listener. Do they expect enough people manning the polls? And what happens if they're short-staffed compared to the amount of people that want to vote on Election Day?
So local boards of elections have actually really stepped up their efforts to try and attract specifically younger poll workers. Oftentimes when you go to a poll, it's folks who tend to be older who are working it. Those are the folks who are more susceptible to COVID-19. So there's natural safety concerns this year. We've seen a concerted push. The reports I've received from Triangle locations that they've gotten great feedback so far. Again, we're still a couple months out from election, or I guess 6 weeks out from election day. It's really coming fast at this point. So you would hope that if people are going to drop out, they do it sooner rather than later. So you'd have these polling locations have an opportunity to plan accordingly. The other point I'd say to that would also be, we're not going to likely see the huge onswell of folks waiting in line or packing these polling locations, because you're having 30 to 40% of voters now going to be voting absentee compared to previous years. So it's great if everything is staffed to handle huge crowds. I'm not anticipating huge crowds at voting locations, so if 1 or 2 people doesn't show up, probably doesn't have the same impact it would have back in 2016.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Another question here. Can I vote curbside if I'm driving my friend to early voting and she is mobility impaired?
I believe some places do offer that. Yes.
By the way, I will give a partial answer to that. I'm not entirely sure, but I have done that. I brought people who were impaired to, and they came to the car, and the person was able to vote right in the car without even getting out. I would double check with the particular polling place just to be sure of that. But now, whether the driver can do that, the person who drove the person who was able-bodied, that's a different question. And you might check that as well, because you might need to vote in the other ways that we described earlier. I'm not certain of that one. So
curbside voters, according to the State Board of Elections, basically need to sign an affidavit that they have a disability. And the State Board of Elections will actually describe what classifies as a disability in order to take advantage of that process. So it could be a bit liberal interpretation of what you would say a disability is. But if you are young and able and healthy to do so, and it's clear that you do not have a disability, I believe you would not be able to do that. But again, I don't know if poll workers are going to be asking people to prove that they can't do it either.
okay, all right. Thank you for coming back to that one. Let me just check. All right. So let's talk a little bit about down.
We do have a question here.
Yes.
About I did see someone had a question about the 2 North Carolina Board of Election members who just resigned and
Yes.
what the issue was. That's a really important question and a really interesting thing, because I actually just spoke with I was here with the Trump event, and I spoke with some of the state Republican leaders and Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Essentially, it boils down to this: back in July, knowing we were in the coronavirus pandemic, state legislators actually worked together, shocking, really, bipartisan, on a bipartisan elections bill, where they came up with a compromise and said, look, we know everyone's going to be needing to vote absentee. The Republicans said no drop boxes, no all mail voting, as in no just automatically mail out a ballot to registered voters, but we will allow to drop 2 witnesses down to 1. It used to be a witness requirement of 2, and used to have to be notarized sometimes. That doesn't have to be there anymore, so just 1 witness. And no, you don't need a reason. No excuse absentee. Anyone can get it for any reason. It used to have to be for, you needed, whether it was sickness, out of town, whatever. So they got rid of all that. They also came up with a compromise saying, again, it's got to be postmarked by November 3rd, but arrive by November 6th. So this was all agreed upon. This was overwhelmingly passed by the General Assembly, Republicans and Democrats supporting. So there is a lawyer named Mark Elias. He is a Democratic lawyer who has become notorious or has become heroic, whatever your perspective is, in filing lawsuits across the country. He's now filed lawsuits in 27 different states regarding voting laws. And some of them have been successful. Some of them have not been. Most have been successful. And he filed a lawsuit in North Carolina challenging the law. And
what was he challenging? What aspect?
He was challenging, the limits of the witnesses, the limits of, meaning he didn't think there should be any witnesses. That
he was saying it was too
he's
onerous.
arguing that all of this is limiting people's right to vote, and that it's unconstitutional. So the sides, and the interesting thing is the sides are, you have this Democratic lawyer, and who is, North Carolina's top lawyer, a Democrat, Josh Stein. So they negotiated a settlement, a proposed settlement that's going to go before a judge. And what the settlement proposes is, if there is a mistake if there's an issue with the witness, or if there is a mistake on your absentee ballot, you don't have to fill out a new ballot. You just have to sign a form. And creating now these ballot drop boxes, and extending the deadline, instead of it having to arrive by November 6th, which is 3 days after the election, push it back to November 12th, which is 9 days after the election. So Republicans are up in arms. They are accusing collusion between the Democratic lawyer and Josh Stein, the Democratic Attorney General, and saying, look, you can't just arbitrarily come in and change the law that was passed over the summer in a bipartisan way. These were never amendments that were proposed. So the 2 Republican members of the 5-member Board of Elections resigned.
That's
in protest.
That's quite
and so Republicans expect this to be a countersuit, and it's going to be filed in federal court.
But don't worry, the Supreme Court will take care of it, because there'll be 9 justices.
Or don't worry, just send in your ballot early and don't worry about any of this stuff.
Well, thank you for that explanation, that you knew all those details. Appreciate it very much. Let's go on. We have a few more minutes. So what I want to do here is, we said we would, if we could, talk about some of the down ballot issues. I have one question, but before I get to that, are there any particular down ballot races or issues that you think either of you think are particularly poignant for our Jewish community?
Look, we called this session "What You Think You Know, What You Don't Know Yet," because this ballot is actually probably going to take you about 10 minutes to fill out. And that's because there's just a lot on it. This is a presidential election. You have a United States Senator, Tom Tillis, who's up for re-election. You have the governor up for re-election. You have the attorney general up for re-election. You have the lieutenant governor up for election. You have a number of what's called the Council of State. This is the North Carolina Superintendent of Public Schools, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Insurance Commissioner, all of these different positions that really affect your day-to-day life, maybe even more so than some of these federal positions. I was talking to people at the JCC pool, and they were saying, boy, I don't know what's going to happen, Trump or this. I said, listen, I understand, but day-to-day, I understand you're in this bubble, you're watching the news, you're listening to news, but day-to-day, how much does the president actually change your life? What policies actually change your life? When it's the General Assembly, it's your school board. These are the different positions. The insurance commissioner, your Department of Agriculture, who works on, the food processes here in North Carolina, and your electric bills when it comes to insurance. They look at your electric and your water and your sewer and your car insurance and your health insurance. These are the things that matter. These are the things in the local government level that are so very important. And that's what's also going to be on your ballot this year. So yes, the federal things are very important. Your congressmen, all 13 congressmen are up for election this year. You're also going to have a number of judges, the Supreme Court. We have the potential for a Chief Justice. And then you have the Associate Justice is also up for election. These are all very important things that, again, just go beyond the breadth. They have much more of an impact, I think, on your day-to-day life than some of the big federal offices.
I will say that although I'm not advocating for a particular party, there are two Jewish members of the community who are running for office, Josh Stein, who is Attorney General, and Mark Davis, the Supreme Court. So I believe they're both in those positions now. But I'm just pointing out, folks, for your general knowledge, that they are on the ballot. Let me give you one more question. Michael, anything did you want to add before I ask this next question?
No, I think Jonah summed it up pretty well.
Let me ask you this. Even as far as I can tell, both of the suggested ballots coming out from Republicans and Democrats don't answer or don't address one question. There is a referendum on this ballot. Can either of you explain what that is about?
No,
It is,
I can't.
It's the City of Raleigh housing bonds.
Yes. So this is only for people who live in the city of Raleigh.
Okay.
So there are no statewide referendums. Thank you for this.
Oh,
yes.
Sorry, I wasn't.
This is, I believe, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not even sure if it's a no tax bond or if it is a tax increase. But yes, long before the pandemic, there have been issues with affordable housing. And the city of Raleigh wants to put, I think it's some $800 million or something. It's big. Maybe it's not that much, but I think it's big. Maybe it's not 800. Maybe it's 8 or 80. I don't remember. I mean, it's sizable. What is it?
I'm trying to read it. It's very small print,
It's $80 million.
80 million.
Okay.
80 million. 80 million.
So I had the 8 and 1 0. Okay, so it was 80 million. Yes, 80 million a bond to create more affordable housing projects, because what ends up happening is rent becomes too high, and this is before the pandemic, of course. Rent becomes too high, and all of a sudden police officers, teachers, more middle-class jobs can't afford to live in downtown Raleigh. So instead they have to live farther out, which means they're less likely to work in Raleigh, and there's no public transportation to get them to Raleigh. So they are trying to create to make the city more accessible with affordable housing.
Okay, so that's what the issue is, and a voter in Raleigh can vote yes or no on that bond issue. Is that right?
Yes, the city of Raleigh also, because this is not a partisan issue, the city of Raleigh releases all this information out on their website pretty clearly in terms of the financial breakdowns of what you can be seeing. As Jonah said, affordable housing has long been an issue in Raleigh. It's only been exacerbated as we've seen probably more tech jobs and higher paying jobs come in, people moving from out of state like Jonah and myself, who may be coming from areas where you had a higher cost of living. So when you kind of have that shift going on, the folks who've been here for a while and were able to live at one price point may not be able to live at this current price point. So we've seen elected leaders try to address this. There has been some progress. We covered a story about a couple months ago. The city of Raleigh, Wake County was selling land for $1 for affordable housing. So we've been seeing a lot of creative ways the county has tried to address this issue. I believe for this housing bond, it's for-profit and nonprofit developers, it's single-family and multifamily units, it's new units and rehabilitation of units. So it's a bit of a combination of everything. But the city leaders have been working on this for several months now. The 24-person advisory board that kind of came up with this bond suggestion and bond language. So again, I would certainly recommend folks read up on the financials of how that money can be used and will be used. The city of Raleigh has it all on their website.
Guys, in a moment, I'm going to wrap us up. I'll give you, but before I do that, any last comments, either of you? And by the way, we're going to close it in a minute with some of your video clips, Jonah. But before we do that, and I don't want to miss anything, was there any comments that either of you wanted to make to be sure our voters here at this time?
No, I just want to thank you all, and we look forward to having the candidates, and it's a really incredible opportunity. So please spread the word, because I mean, if you think about the voting blocks in this state, the Jewish community, not necessarily a big one in North Carolina, but we are very fortunate to be having Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest, North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore, Congressman David Price, and then Governor Roy Cooper to join us over the next month before the election. And so I strongly encourage everyone to please spread the word about this, and feel free to reach out to us as well. we're always happy. We work for you, and so we're trying to do our best and with what we can do in this pandemic. And I'm really glad Michael can join us because he's truly an incredible asset to our station and a budding star in all of this. And it's just really great it's really great to be a part of this community and to be able to do this with all of you. So thank you.
Jonah, enormous thanks to you also for reaching out to people, helping to connect with candidates. Michael, you've been fantastic. Good to know you and to hear your reporting. So great thanks to both of you and to our Jewish Community Relations Council for helping to sponsor this today. I do want to mention that, Jonah, you just mentioned our next event will be, in fact, with Jonah interviewing Dan Forrest. That will take place September 30th at 7 o'clock. So you tune in as you did this time by logging in, getting a link to that live event. Again, afterwards, you can see it on the recording. So enormous thanks to both of you and to the Jewish Community Relations Council and the Jewish Federation. With that said, as we wrap up here, we have just a couple of minutes. Maybe Mindy, if it's possible, will you be able to play a couple of those clips that Jonah had just made to give us some of the latest information that he did on ABC? If you can, we'll show those just as we end today. And particular thanks to Jonah for coming in, for reporting to us from Charlotte. All right, go ahead.
You can track your package, you can track your pizza. Why not track your absentee ballot? But here's why voting is different. There's no returns or exchanges. Tom Pfeiffer is a Wake County voter casting a ballot via absentee for the first time.
You know, you have to go to the doctors, you have to do some grocery shopping. But if there's an alternative to waiting in line at the polls, why not take advantage of that?
Pfeiffer not wanting to appear on camera, but telling us he requested his ballot back in August and received it earlier this month. He and his wife then filling out those ballots and hand delivering them to the Board of Elections. They were all set to drop it off until they overheard a Board of Elections staff member addressing the voters ahead of them. Good thing they heard it, too.
We heard him telling a person in front of us that her envelope was incorrect because it did not list the city, state, and zip code for the witness.
With just 6 weeks to go before Election Day, the Wake County Board of Elections warehouse is a fine-tuned, well-oiled democracy machine that's now working overtime to meet the demand of North Carolina voters. To date, a record 7.1 million registered voters and more than 970,000 absentee ballot requests across the state. In Wake County, the state's largest, another record, 773,000 registered voters, more than 137,000 requests for absentee ballots. The bulk of ballots coming from Democrat and unaffiliated voters. The latest data showing the vast majority so far, 97% of ballots, accepted and locked in this cage until board members open the envelopes and put those ballots into the tabulators. So 97% are good, only 3% bad. If that's a social studies test, you get an A, but this isn't social studies. And 3% of 1 million absentee ballots, that's still 30,000 votes. And in a hotly contested election, where purple states like North Carolina could be the next Florida, that's huge. State officials telling the I-Team top mistakes include missing signatures and missing addresses. Officials today reassuring voters that a rejected ballot now doesn't mean it won't get counted later.
It's not at a stage where they aren't counting. We just need to get them cured or corrected before it goes before the county board, where they do the official approving.
Court battles already ongoing about how to get them corrected. A proposed settlement could mean just filling out a form and not filling out a new ballot. Better to just avoid making the mistake in the first place.
perhaps people are rushing or they're just not familiar with the process. And if there's any doubt, call our office and find out what the procedures are supposed to be.
Tom Pfeiffer did just that, and he's now using Ballot Tracker to see that his vote gets approved.
I think they're doing a great job.
Looking at past elections, something else to disqualify your ballot? Getting it in late. They must be postmarked by November 3rd, and for now, arrive at your County Board of Elections office by that Friday, November 6th. Now that's up for debate right now in court too, and a proposed settlement could mean the deadline is pushed back to November 12th, 9 days after the election. But here's some advice. Just don't literally push the envelope. For the I-Team, Jonah Kaplan, ABC 11, Eyewitness News.
That's a great report. We appreciate it very much. So a word to the wise, all of us, get your, do it early, do it now, or if you vote on election day, then you're all set. But let's not wait till after election day, even though that may or may not work. So this has been terrific. I just want to give a quick thanks to Mindy Lawton, Rachel Weissman, and Rebecca Allen, who are behind the scenes technical folks, staff at Federation, making sure this works so well. Thank you. And if we have a moment, Mindy, would you like to play the last clip as we finish up our program this evening? We'll see if we can. I know it takes you just a minute to get that set up. Okay, it sounds like we don't have that anymore. So if we need it, we'll use it at our next one. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. Michael, you're still with us. Thank you very much today. You've been terrific. And I know John is now in the car on his way back to Raleigh, but thank you very much. And good night from the Jewish Community Relations.